Hello, everyone. I see everybody's coming into the room. Welcome, welcome. I'm just going to give it a minute. Hope everybody's well. And more people are entering our room. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. Okay, and a few more seconds before people come into the room, and we're going to begin. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our CFO-LC DEI Empower Hour, Advancing a Culture of Equity. My name is Caroline Boyce. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the National Membership Manager for the CFO Leadership Council. I'm also joined with Charisse Guasau, our DEI Marketing Director. Welcome. Just want to go over a few items before we get started. We have a large turnout, so to ensure smooth bandwidth, we ask that all attendees turn off their video. Also, your audio is muted just so that there are no distractions. Our speaker will leave his video on. We want your input and welcome your questions. So please use the chat area and we'll be monitoring that area and we'll ask questions during the program. This program is from 12 to 1 p.m., but our speaker has agreed to stay on afterwards for 15 minutes afterwards so you can network and ask additional questions about the wonderful program. This program is approved for 1 CPE credit, so please look out for polling questions. I want to give some shout outs. You know, I always like to do a shout out for our programs. Special shout out to our president, Jack McCullough, for introducing our speaker. Also, I'd like to congratulate Jack on his new book, which I have right here, The Psychopathic CEO, an Executive Guide, now available on Amazon. And no, Jack did not pay me to say that, just so you know. To learn more about our DEI group, go to our website at www.cfoleadershipcouncil.com and check out our upcoming programs in our amazing advisory group. Our advisory group works with us to bring these programs to you. Another item I'd like to mention is our Ascend program. The Ascend program is an opportunity for senior financial executives from underrepresented backgrounds to become premium members of the CFO Leadership Council. Kemy Joseph is the CEO and DEI strategist of F.E.A.R.S Advantage. He's on a mission to help 5 million business leaders advance equity in their organizations by 2030, create company cultures where people of all backgrounds can work safely and thrive. He holds a bachelor's in communication from the University of Miami, along with a master's in brain-based teaching and learning. Wow, that's impressive. As well as an educational specialist degree in leadership from Nova Southeastern University. Over the past 2 decades, Kemy has served in several leadership roles in organizations, small and large, including working with multiple Nobel Peace Prize winners to inspire social justice initiatives in over 40 countries around the world. In 2012, he also led a 22,000-mile kindness tour across North America. Very impressive. Today, he's here to help strengthen our understanding of DEI. Kemy, take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction, as well as thank you for the opportunity to be in front of you all. And know that everyone's kind of coming in from different places in Zoom. Can you please put in the chat, thank you? So I know you're out there, I know you're listening, I know you're active, and we can say thank you to everyone who's been part of your DEI committee and your advisory and your marketing and all that has made this possible. And thank you all for investing your time. I know we're talking to quite a bit of financial officers here, so we want to make sure that this feels like a return on your investment. So as we go through here, the one thing I want to start at the top talking about my role as a CEO. What's that? All right, just make sure everyone's on mute. talking about my role as a CEO, being able to look at the duality of those acronyms. So CEO can stand for Chief Executive Officer and Chief Equity Officer. For me, thinking about that has already transformed the way that I see my organization, knowing that for a lot of us, equity starts from the top down and really allows us to take hold and take responsibility for how are we increasing fairness. If we look at equity as fairness, increasing a culture of fairness in our organization, it starts at the top and it permeates from that, or it gets shut down by us at the top and then does not make it to anywhere else in our organization. So just even in that little bit of an introduction of who I am and my title, I just need you to understand how we think about this work for multiple capacities in order to make sure that we can serve a wide array of people who come to this conversation. So thank you for being here. And with that being said, I want to cover the objectives for this. We want to make sure you can learn the 5 ROIs of DEI to help create the right solutions at the right time. And then learn how to measure trust in your company culture so you can advance equity without offending people and making things worse. And finally, help to engage more of your team in DEI as a positive experience. I love that this is called the Empower Hour, right? So you can empower them with the high impact, low burden skills to help reach your goals. Now, one of my goals is to serve you as best we can. So it's important to understand who's in the room. We're going to launch a couple of the polls that was mentioned. So here's the first one to get a sense of how big your company is. So you should see the first poll pop up. It says, how many employees does your company currently have? I can tell that y'all are ready for the poll questions because people all immediately jumped in there. Fantastic. So thank y'all for already letting me know that we have from the 1 to 10 size all the way to the 300 plus. I'll show you those results right now so you can see them. And then we will launch one additional poll. So this gives a sense of the size. So as I start to explain, one thing that was interesting recently, somebody asked me, how soon should we start thinking about company culture? How soon should we start thinking about DEI? And we're saying from our perspective, you need to be thinking about your company culture as soon as you bring on one additional person. So if you were one of the founders, if you are a founder, you bring on one other person, we got to start already thinking about our company culture. So you're never too small to do it. It's just that the size of the initiatives or the scale that you go has to scale for your team. So there's no one size fits all solution. So as we start talking about solutions, it'll be important that you know that I'm wanting to offer this group a variety of sizes based on the responses we just received in this first poll. And now as we get to the second poll here is I would love to know what you've already done. Let's look at what you've already done. If we want to align these objectives to the people in the room, let's see what you've already done. Great. Okay, I'm seeing, and then this is great because folks, I know I appreciate those of you who also submitted in advance questions and asking for real life examples. There'll be times where you'll hear from me, but I'm loving to see that folks already have tried some things, and that way we can get some more examples from the group as well. So we'll take just one more moment and then we'll close out this first poll. And done. So here are the results. It's interesting, quite a bit of y'all have done a town hall or DEI committee. And make sure you stay to the end because we'll talk about the difference between a DEI committee and a DEI book club. And then some of y'all have done DEI audits and assessments. I'm interested to see from those that are here, from those of you who've already done a strategic plan, and quite a bit of you have done workshops and then DEI leadership coaching. So fantastic. I'm glad to know that many of y'all are already on the journey. So that way, as we start this conversation and starting to answer some of your questions of how to scale it, I want to just pay attention that we're at different stages in this and make sure that as we go forward, we're listening for what will make the most sense for our team and for our organization moving forward, knowing that in an hour, or now we have about 40 minutes, we can only cover so much. And so as we start to look at the high level of these concepts, we're thinking about what would help, what would be the biggest game changer for you that will help to move that needle forward. So with that, let's dive into the objectives. Now, many of us who are tracking finances, we're thinking about something like customer lifetime value. And one question that we've been posing to folks in your positions is, can you have customer lifetime value without employee lifetime value? And one example of this is recently I'm from Miami, Florida. I have a big family. Glad to be back here in Miami. And I have 9 siblings, so there's 10 of us. So I also have about 15 nieces and nephews right now. One thing I've always wanted to do since I was a kid was go paintballing. And one of my nephews said, "Hey, Uncle, can you take us paintballing?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, awesome. I'm glad that we can afford to do that now because we couldn't do that before." So we were super excited. We reserved a month in advance this paintballing experience for my nephews. It took about 5 of them to go there. And what's interesting is as we arrived, even though we had an appointment, even though we scheduled months in advance, they had a 2-hour wait. And obviously this is a little bit frustrating after we've done the planning. And I asked the employees, what can we do to help? Is there anything we can do to move this along? And they literally told us, we've been telling our managers that every weekend we're slammed and people have to wait. We've been asking for additional support and additional supplies. But the best thing you can do for us right now is leave a negative Yelp review, negative Google review, make it public that you had this experience. Because if they see it as a negative review, they're more likely to listen to you as a customer than to us. Now, we were preparing to spend lots of money on that visit, plus many more visits. And now we're never going back to that place because the employees are not being treated well. And I would never support an organization, again, that is treating their employees like that. So I asked the question, can you have lifetime customer value without lifetime employee value? And as we start to break this question down and really look about how that connects to culture, we can then look at a different direction of what do you need to have both customer lifetime value and employee lifetime value? And y'all can play along with me in the chat. You can go ahead and start guessing, but you can also help to finish this phrase that many people have said. People only do business with folks that they like, know, and what? Put it in the chat. Come on, you got this. Like, know, and come on, trust. There you go. There you go. Like, know, and trust. And this is really important because employees only do their best work for leaders that they like, know, and trust. And most people say, yeah, we can trust the numbers if we're talking about finances, but there's folks who we're seeing even in this time, narrative can eat data, eat science, eat facts. So is there a narrative of mistrust in your company culture that is actually preventing people from actually seeing the numbers and looking at how the numbers that you all are measuring and tracking on a day-to-day basis are impacting your team? Because a lot of us are tracking the finances, but are we actually tracking along the culture and making it measurable, which I know is some of the questions y'all asked before we came into this session. So let's talk about how some of the ways we can measure trust. Because, for example, we're looking at trust with investors, if you have them, customers, team members, vendors. And does this depend on your type of business? No, because this is why we put it in these categories of saying, don't you need trust? Our services are quite costly, and it's interesting to we have to build trust in this whole process for our customers and for everybody we serve in that process, and making sure that our team members can deliver the high value for why people want to pay us the high cost, right? So I don't think there's a business that can operate on mistrust. So if you figure that out, you let me know. But I think the trust applies across the board, which is why we're talking about company culture, because the other part of not only just thinking about the culture that you're building for your team, but how does the culture of the clients that you serve also impacting your team? And I think a lot of folks don't put those two together. So if we're trying to even have employee lifetime value, are we taking care of them as they go into other people's organizations and do the services that we're providing? A lot of times we are dealing with social warfare inside of companies. And so it's interesting for us to prepare our team to go and deal with that and make sure that as we are gaining and building momentum and getting more and more clients, that we're picking and choosing the ones who also support us having a culture of trust in our organization. So culture is hard to build, but it is much easier to burn. And once you start burning those bridges of trust, we know it takes quite a bit to repair from that. And this is why a lot of people have also been reaching out to us, because in this time of social warfare, as I mentioned, it is much easier to break trust and burn these bridges. But if we start talking about it inside of our own organization, that trust is increased or decreased by our use of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And that shows up in our behaviors, which is what creates our culture. Culture is our behaviors, how we treat each other regularly and habitually. That is the simplest definition of culture here. A lot of people try to measure their culture by an employee engagement survey. Now, employee engagement surveys are great, but they do not capture the whole picture of your culture, especially when we're starting to help more and more people realize that your culture is happening by default or by design. And most times by default, it's a culture of inequity, a culture where only a few people win and others and more people will lose. Whereas by design, we know that things have gotten a lot really intense in our world. Because things have got intense, we have to be intentional. To be intentional, we have to do this by design. And it's crazy because so many people will design their product, right? Design and really forecast how their sales are going to go, but they're not really designing their culture and spending time thinking about how does this align with our goals to make sure that our organization can succeed and our team can thrive. So type the word design in the chat if you want to have a culture by design instead of one by default. And as you're doing that, enter in F.E.A.R.S Advantage, which stands for Fuel, Equitable, Actions, Relationships, and Systems. We very much take a methodical approach to make sure that we can make DEI approachable, actionable, profitable, and enjoyable. And we collaborate with dynamic practitioners and platforms to ensure the 5 ROIs of DEI, which I'll mention to you in a moment. As was said earlier, we're on this mission to help 5 million leaders advance equity in their organizations by 2030 to create more environments where employees can work safely and thrive as part of our bigger vision to create a world where every person can live safely and thrive. Now, one of the biggest questions we get in these trainings is, can I get your resources? Can I get your slides? So you're going to see a link at the bottom of every slide that has the ability for us to connect. So it says F.E.A.R.Sadvantage.com/Kemy Connect. And it will take you to a page like this where I'll say, thanks for meeting, thanks for being awesome, and give you some additional resources. So I just want y'all to know that's at the bottom of almost every slide to keep you along in this journey. For right now, to make sure we make the most of this time currently, we'll be focusing on fuel, equitable, and action. So we'll cover about 10 minutes or so in each of these areas to make sure that you have a more holistic view of DEI and also can help track your action steps along the way. Now, because we're here with a group of CFOs, this is going to be very relevant that we got to stop burning money in our organizations. And the reason this is important for us to say, especially in the DEI context, is we're helping more and more people understand that we're either fueling fires or forward progress in our organization. A lot of people believe they're fueling forward progress. And then when we actually look at the numbers, they're fueling fires. So if we can help you stop doing that in this presentation, that would be huge. Let's talk about it. In terms of forward progress, we ask folks, what's your vision of DEI in your organization? And some people might say, oh, we're going to have Zoom calls that go amazingly well and people are excited to be on Zoom, or people come back to the office and they're just loving being back in the office. And some people say, Kemy, we just want meetings about DEI to go well. That's all we want. Say, okay. We say that our vision of DEI in the organization is that every employee can work safely and thrive. So the first question I'll ask you to be taking away is, what's your vision of DEI in your organization? And this is important for us to understand that it's not just a campaign for minorities, that everyone in your organization can benefit from this. So some of you are saying, how do we get buy-in from the top? It's really about how are we positioning DEI? If we're thinking about it just as social justice, then people are like, well, that I don't have to deal with the world's problems. Like, yeah, we're not asking you to deal with that. We're asking you to deal with it inside your organization. So a question you can bring back to your team is everyone in your organization thriving? If you try to find that, go ahead and do a Google search. You get nothing. We have not seen that, especially in a time where people are just now catching on that there's been so many inequities that are preventing diverse people in their organization from thriving. So you cannot actually answer that question. So part of the one thing I want to offer you right now is a reframe of how we even look at DEI. Right now, many people are just now talking about racial equity and believing that that is the DEI. Okay, we're talking about race. But race is only one piece of the pie. So we got race, ethnicity, culture, mental and physical ability, age. Then we have sex, and then sexual orientation, gender, and gender identity. These are all ways that people are identifying, as well as ways that impact ourselves as leaders and how we show up in our organization. Then we start adding life factors, career factors, and then start adding life experiences, including trauma that we've, especially this last year, the conversations around trauma have been immense. This is really a snapshot of what intersectionality could look like. So some of y'all said you have several hundred employees. Doesn't matter if you have one employee or several. This is a snapshot of who people are and the dynamics that we can bring into the workplace. Now, the more people you have, the more likely it is that you're having all of these show up in the workplace. But is our culture really supportive of that? A lot of times it's not. We have to hide who we are. You're going to see how that's creating problems for us. With that being said, in order to have a culture where people can show up as their full selves, that is a culture of equity or increasing cultural equity in your organization, which is a systematic effort to advance people of all diversities in your organization. If you're just talking about skin color, you're talking about visual diversity. And that is going to become a problem that is already a problem for people because we're approaching it improperly. So the first thing I'll tell you to do is expand the vision of what diversity, equity, inclusion can do for your organization by expanding how we look at people, how we see people. Because when we start to talk about this is the vision, if hey, everybody can thrive in our organization, they can bring their full self in a professional manner, then we have to talk about what gets in the way. So if you need trust to have customer lifetime value and employee lifetime value, then the biggest thing that gets in the way is mistrust. Because when we don't trust people in our organization, we bring less and less of ourselves to the organization. And then we have problems that start from there. So I'll show you exactly what I mean here, is that mistrust can be the most expensive problem a company can have. And what I mean by that is instead of talking about the elephant in the room, we usually talk about the bomb in the room. Most of us are afraid that, especially as we start talking about DEI, that something's going to go wrong and blow up in our face. And so we look at it in a chain reaction, that organizations would generally have issues in 5 areas. The first is people problems. And part of this is because people start organizations. So people generally are bringing their problems to work. And some people say more money, more problems. I don't know, more people, more problems, especially if we do not be mindful about the rest of this chain reaction. Because we have people problems, and then process problems, policy problems, production problems, and then profit problems. And usually y'all are probably as CFOs having more conversations when it becomes a profit problem. By the time it becomes a profit problem, it is a really expensive problem to solve. This chain reaction is set in motion and sustained by mistrust. And so it's important that it's really more so it happens like this. It happens in a more secular fashion because people right now are trying to play hot potato and pass the bomb. Hey, is DEI only in HR? It's like, no, DEI is not just in HR. If you leave it in HR and HR does not have functional authority over everything in the organization, you're trying to delegate DEI. It's like passing the bomb and just hoping that when it explodes, you're far enough away from it. But if it explodes in your organization, it affects you in your organization. So it's important here that this is what it can look like to have a culture of inequity, a culture of mistrust, a culture of disengagement. I mentioned earlier, most people measure their culture through employee engagement. So if that's how you've been doing it, let's look at it from that perspective. Now, this is coming from Gallup, who is the leader in measuring engagement across the world. Do me a favor, type in the chat. They have a percentage of how many employees across the world they would say are disengaged. What do you think it is? We'll do Price is Right rules. Whoever can guess it without going over. So Price is Right rules got 35, 70, 75, 60. Okay. All right. So far, I see somebody who's getting close, and then the number is 85%. So some of y'all got really close. And the wild thing is most people are not surprised about this. Some of y'all even estimated higher. But let's look at how that really shows up and impacts us, because I know we're talking to numbers folks here. So 85% of employees are disengaged. What's interesting is this research also showed that for every employee who's disengaged, you're losing about 34% of their salary to disengagement. So you're paying them for 100% engagement and you're not getting that. What's interesting is for an employee who you're paying $60,000 a year, you can be losing about $20,000 to disengagement. So now we're talking about burning money, right? So to stop burning money, I'm showing you how money is being burnt in a very literal way here. So if you have 100 employees, I know some of y'all said you had more, some of you had less. You can do the math for your own number of employees. But let's say for 100, just to keep numbers simple. So if you had 100 employees, it really means from this perspective that 85 of them are disengaged. And so from that perspective, $20,000 per employee lost per year can be $1.7 million, $144,000 a month, and then $4,000, close to $5,000 per day. I don't like that. I don't want that for you. I don't want that for your team. And some people say, okay, why don't we just fire the disengaged employees? Well, you could, but the Work Institute would say for every employee that you fire, it can cost about $20,000 to replace them. And so either way, we're still here that we're losing, and we're not here to blame the employee because our culture can eat employee engagement. That's what I'm saying. If we're trying to measure employee engagement, it's like we're putting a lot of pressure on the employee. Somebody said yesterday, it's like the metaphor of trying to hit the gas in your car and say, I want the car to go faster, but we haven't invested in a better engine or any kind of aerodynamics. We just want the car to go faster, but it wasn't built for that. But we're blaming the car, not us as the driver, or actually investing in what we could do to have a better car, a better ride, a better company, a better culture. So with that being said, I will ask you all, for those of you who are trying to ask about the cost here, what's the cost of not knowing, of just letting it operate exactly the way it is? We would tell you, for some of you who are asking to get started, we would say assess instead of make a mess. Actually do an assessment. Some of y'all said you did this earlier. If you have only done an employee engagement survey, I'll tell you that it's not going to cut it, and I'll show you an example of why. So again, we said before, trust is increased or decreased by DEI, which shows up in our behaviors, and it equals our culture. So we offer a cultural equity assessment. The platform we use is called Culture Amp. You are welcome to use the Culture Amp with or without us. It's just, so we've checked in the Gallup, we've checked in the predictive index, we checked so many platforms. Culture Amp is the one that we enjoy the most because it allows us to get more demographic data and actually measure culture in addition to engagement. You will not see a cultural equity assessment on the Culture Amp platform because that's one that we offer through their platform. But just know, if you want to say, hey, we want to bootstrap it, go to Culture Amp and use that platform. We've even checked Tiny Pulse. That Culture Amp is a rock star across all the boxes that we wanted to check in terms of making sure our assessment would measure what is happening in an organization. When we do the assessment, some folks are saying, how do we get metrics and connect it to ROI? We measure it in these 5 areas. Because a lot of people are just measuring DEI for the sake of measuring how diverse our team is. To us, that's fine to know, but if we're not connecting the dots to these problem areas, then a lot of our team will see it disconnected. And notice that these problem areas do not say things like recruiting and hiring because that's a people problem, right? If you think about what problem happens when you have poor recruiting and hiring, it becomes a people problem. You don't have the right people in the right seats, then it creates a process problem, right? So now I'm glad that you're catching along here. Now, if we talk about, I'm just giving you a sample of a group that we just ran an assessment with. So the green score here will have y'all asked for real world examples, so I want to give you one. So for this organization, their green score is representing favorable. So these are people who answered agree or strongly agree to questions that were in the people category. The white portion of this gray area is representing neutral scores, so neither agree or disagree. And the red is answering is the disagree or strongly disagree. So I just want to give you a sense of how to read that data point there. So when we look at these 5 areas and we show the team here that here's where they're struggling. Here is where they're struggling. And we're for us, if we look at a metric here, because some of you are asking what metrics can we be forecasting, how do we get this team to 90s across the board? So the reason we say 90s across the board, and I'll show it to you in this way as well, is if we have this area, if you think about a tire, if your tire was lopsided like this, could you actually be rolling forward smoothly? Many organizations don't even realize that they're running lopsided, that their company, their culture is like a tire that's half empty. And so it's important that when we talk about going towards these 90s, we still provide room for things to not be going perfectly. We're not aiming for perfection. We're saying, what if 90% was the norm and that 10% was neutral instead of unfavorable? And that way we can account for the difficulties in the world. And for those who are asking, what types of questions are you asking to find out this? We got you. It's coming up next. So now the other piece, what I like about Culture Amp and gathering demographic data, which is why employee engagement alone is not as helpful, is you have to gather demographic data. And I'll just show you a split. So we asked a question. I understand how pay and promotion decisions are made. You all are CFOs. I promise you this question across the board, we keep seeing this, that people do not understand how pay and promotion work in their organization. If I don't understand how pay works, why am I going to work for pay I don't understand? Including promotions, how do I get higher in your organization? So you can say, okay, this is already low. And then if we start to break it by the leaders in the organization and then by the staff, we're starting to see this is one demographic, right? Leaders and staff, we can add gender here, we could do race here or ethnicity, tenure. We start to see red hit the heat map in different ways based on the questions and how we break down the demographics. So these are some of the questions we ask in the profit area. Our organization effectively directs resources towards our organizational goals. And then our organization integrates DEI into revenue generating efforts to ensure staff members have cultural competence to appropriately serve the constituents and communities we impact. How would your team stack up in these questions? So when I tell you to measure, if some of you are saying, how do we get the numbers? This is just showing you some questions in the focus area. We ask intentional questions in all 5 of those areas that I showed you of people, process, policy, production, and profit to make sure that we understand what's impacting your team and look at demographic information to then focus your attention. And that was one of the other questions you asked ahead of time. How do we focus our attention? So as we start to see these gaps, we're always focused on, first and foremost, closing the neutral, right? And then because sometimes that's through communication. You wouldn't be surprised how many people have done some great work in DEI, but they communicated it very poorly. So their team doesn't even know how things have been changing as a result of their feedback. So it's important that we start to communicate. Some of the communication can start to close the gaps for the folks who are rating neutral. Well, some people will say neutral is a passive no, but then there's people who rate active no's. And those are hard. Those folks are harder to win over, harder to make changes for them. So focus on closing the neutral gap, and that helps to communicate to the folks who are ready to know or strongly disagree that they are able to see that change is actually happening and it could benefit them as they include their voice in decision making. Yeah, tracking along with me? Go ahead and type the word yes in the chat if you're tracking along with me, because this is going to close us out in the part about fuel, because you can start to see that there are fires there, and are we measuring them in a way that's going to help us get some data that can help drive better conversations in our team. Now, again, I'll just plant that seed for those of you who are like, I want these slides. It's there. Just go to Kemy or fearsadvantage.com/Kemy Connect. Now, we're going into this part about equitable. To make something equitable, again, equitable is fairness. But it's important that as we start to increase fairness for people in organizations, a lot of folks raise their hand and say, what about me? Why should we just be focusing on this group and I'm still struggling in the organization? Right? This is so to help get more buy-in, we have to be just working to increase equity without stigma. Travian Shorters, who's from an organization called Be Me, offers it as asset framing. Are we looking at all of our employees and thinking about the assets they bring to our team, or are we looking at them as liabilities? I know y'all are crunching them. Are you looking at your team members as liabilities? Had one organization yesterday start talking about, hey, we need to save money, so we're reducing headcount. And they're like, Kemy, how do we go about letting people go, knowing that we have to save money? I was like, first of all, figure out how much money you have to save and what that actually means for your team. But from the cultural standpoint, if you come to me and tell me that we're just making cuts because of headcount, even if I am still in the organization after those cuts, I'm still going to be thinking about how does my head count in this next equation? Versus, hey, we are making some cuts that are strategic in order to make sure more people can thrive in our organization. Lets me know that, okay, you're trying to think from my perspective and the company's perspective to help us move forward and do this more successfully. Those are two different, same kind of things got to happen, but it's not about just the numbers. If we make it just about the numbers, then people will start disengaging. So it's important that as we answer this, and some folks are saying, how do we get more people to buy into this? I need you to put in the chat, who decides when you're ready to embrace a change? Who decides when you're ready to embrace the change? Some of y'all looking like, y'all know the answer. The answer is I do, like whoever you are is answering, right? So then thanks, Melissa. That means then we literally, the most fair thing we can do is help people answer this question, what's in it for me? When we're talking about DEI as an initiative, any initiative really, but specifically we're here to talk about DEI. What's in it for me? We can pay employees to sit down, shut up, and listen to us, but we cannot pay them to trust us or answer this question authentically. And then we've been adding this question, what's in it for those I care about? Have this conversation as your C-suite. Have this conversation with your organizational leaders. Have this with your direct reports. We're talking about what's in it for me. Not everybody's going to do this altruistically, but I'm going to show you this next piece, and then I'm going to give you a handout that will have the definitions here. But I want you to understand that we are working to increase equity worldwide. We are focusing. We have to separate these, though, because there are, in terms of equity pathways, there's family equity, housing equity, career equity, social and relational equity, economic equity, educational equity, governmental equity, environmental equity, health and mental health equity, spiritual and religious equity, and then legal equity. Most people have not seen it broken down this way. So when we start talking about something like social justice, it becomes a combination of social and relational equity and then legal equity. Some people say that doesn't belong in the workplace. We're like, yeah, that's somewhat true, but the equity pathways, we need all of them. And when there's a lack of them, it starts to impact us at work. We at F.E.A.R.S Advantage specifically focus on career equity. By being an employer, you have to provide career equity. But notice, we make the conversation about career equity, and it already starts to lower people's anxiety. We're not asking you to solve the world's problems. We're asking you to focus on how you're providing career equity for those you're employing. Now, for us, the reason we chose career equity is because as we increase equity in someone's career, we actually give them a pathway to increase equity across the board. So that's why it's super important for us. We're just going to zoom in on career equity. Now, what I want you to do, I'm actually going to provide you with definitions for each of these. And career equity, again, the EI is not just for minorities. We're talking about career equity. Are we providing a fair path for people to thrive in your organization? So what I want you to do is I'm going to put the prompts on here and describe each one of these areas. And I want you thinking on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you score yourself, with 1 being strongly disagree and 10 being strongly agree. For example, awareness. I'm informed about the various career development opportunities accessible to me in our organization and what is needed to access them. So you don't have to put it in the chat, but just keep tracking along as I go through this, and we'll also give you a handout when this is done. Access. I have fair entry points to apply for relevant career development opportunities aligned with my skills and values. Again, scale of 1 to 10. Opportunity. I've been invited to participate in roles/projects that would lead to career development or advancement after investing my time and effort. Safety. I feel I am free from physical, intellectual, psychological, and emotional harm. Now, if we just stop here, this is what EEO will require you to do: provide equal access and opportunity. Now, if you give your team the bare minimum, which is these 4, then they're going to give you the bare minimum. If you want to see the rest, do me a favor, type thrive in the chat. If you want to see the rest, right? If you're like, hey, we're actually going to go, we want to go beyond the bare minimum. Because otherwise, and something that's important to know as you are typing thrive in there, is if you're only going to go up to safety in your team, it's important that you let them know that so people can make a choice whether or not they want to stay with your organization. The challenge is a lot of people are saying they want to create an environment where everyone thrives, but their actions communicate something different. So it's important that, again, trust is going to be increased or decreased by our behaviors. So if you say you want folks to thrive, I want you to just check in on, based on this scale, how would you consider yourself in thriving? So belonging, the next level. I feel included because my authentic identities and contributions are acknowledged, considered, and valued, especially in decisions that directly impact me. Again, scale of 1 to 10. I have the best available tools, information, and support needed to do my job effectively. Development. My role is optimizing my talents with relevant training opportunities to expand my capacity/skill sets. Advancement. I have upward mobility on a clear path for role expansion aligned with my career goals. We separated development and advancement because some of y'all are in flat organizations, so people may not advance, but do they have the ability to develop their careers? And then autonomy. I have the independence to do the work I'm hired to do with the freedom, trust, and ownership in my role. So obviously you can see this is the opposite of micromanagement. And then legacy. I am making a lasting, meaningful difference through my role while receiving compensation and benefits that enable thriving in other areas of my life. So you're keeping a track of the scale of 1 to 10 here. We move away from just a job description to creating a Thrive plan for our team members and for the clients who bring us in, because we know that not everybody has a pathway to thriving in their organizations currently. I want to pop a PDF in the chat here. So you should receive a PDF, and I will do a quick screen share to show you what that is. So you should receive this PDF, and it'll have the diagram that we've been walking through. And we're talking about visualizing your Thrive plan, which we'll show in a moment. But this is the most important page I want you to look at for right now. Should be page 3 for you. So it gives you the definition that we just walked through, and it gives you a chance to actually tally up a score, a total for yourself. So I want to give you a minute to think about that, because we're going to transition into one breakout room and have a quick discussion of that. So as you're getting the PDF and thinking through, I just want you to understand when you see this diagram in your workbook, this is how a lot of people have been positioning thriving in an organization. That if you're at the lower levels, you only get the safety. Again, if this is all that you're giving to your team, just let them know that so they can make decisions on how to move forward in their lives, right? A lot of people say, okay, you're at your entry level, this is all you get. And you can maybe get some of this belonging, resources, and advancement once you move to middle management. But you cannot thrive here until you're at the executive level, or if you can even get there. We're saying, no, that's an old way of doing things. That's cultural inequity. This is what we're talking about. Do people have the ability to thrive regardless of what position they're in your organization? So it's not a conversation of saying everybody has to get exactly the same thing. It's like, what does thriving look like for your employees, which is why we're asking to create a Thrive plan to make it the most real for you all and the most measurable for you all, is asking you to assess yourself using that PDF I just put in the chat. And we're going to give you a chance to talk about it with folks here in the breakout room. And so this will help us before we close out. So in your breakout rooms, you'll take turns. There'll be only 3 of you in your breakout room. So we're going to be a very quick breakout room. You're going to share your name, your position / title, and answer to one of the following questions. You don't have to share your score if you're not comfortable sharing your score out of 100. You know, that's fine. But it'd be interesting to ask you here, how was your experience of career equity in your organization impacting your leadership? Or what is one thing I can do this quarter to increase career equity for and then we left it blank, because depending on, again, what's in it for you and the people you care about, you might say for my team, for myself, for my whole organization. We leave that up to you, how you want to fill in that blank right there. But just know it's blank intentionally, because something might be important to you that's not important to somebody else. And you'll pick one person in your group to kind of share back. So this gives a chance to kind of digest this career equity path. A lot of people have never seen something like this before. So let's give you a chance in your breakout rooms to discuss, and we'll come back here. Welcome back. Now we have the last 10 minutes here. And so I'd love for those of you who were in the breakout room, if you did end up nominating somebody to report back, I'd love for y'all to put these in the chat. And the rest of y'all, not enough time. So much to talk about, Erica. Yes, 1000%. Trust me. Trust me. I kind of mentioned this a couple of times. Like there's a lot to cover, and then even to talk about it and debrief. And so part of it is also knowing that people, once we start getting into the conversations, more and more people want to get their specific questions answered. So I'll stay a little bit after to be able to help answer questions. And if you go to that fearsadvantage.com/Kemy Connect, you also will be able to connect with us directly. So I would love for those of you who were in the breakout room to, if anybody can summarize in the chat about what the answers to this question here, either one of those questions. I will put in the poll for the rest of y'all while folks are typing in the chat. I will put here this third poll question in terms of, now that we're talking about DEI at a deeper level, what is your concerns? What are your concerns, right? I know that we're gonna close out with making it profitable and show you how to those 5 ROIs of DEI. So we're talking about making DEI actionable, how to make it actionable, how to measure the ROI. You're concerned that discussing it will bring more conflict. Their leadership doesn't get it. So this is part of the reason I wanted to make sure we show you this here. I think if leadership doesn't see that this is where we're going, because most people don't actually talk about where DEI is going, then we actually can have more of the conflict. And then to make it actionable, part of the reason I gave you that document there, that can be a simple thing to incorporate into one of your assessments and helping to break apart those questions. Because we're talking about making it actionable, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to take people towards a place of thriving? That's what we would like you all to be doing as you go forward in this journey. So I'm answering your questions as I'm seeing the poll questions come in, because this is a great way to make sure that we go along. So this next one here is a comprehensive DEI initiative already in your budget? Some people are saying yes. Some people are saying a few things here and there. Yeah, that's what we see for the most part. A few things here and there. A few things here and there. And I know that you all are CFO, or a lot of you are CFOs, and a lot of you have different leadership roles in your company. So it's interesting that I want to show you as we close out one thing to consider in terms of how you can make it more actionable and make sure it's in your budget. So the final thing now, since we're talking to you all as the folks who are controlling a lot of the finances, so let's talk about pay equity. Because if you say one thing you can do to make it actionable, if you are the one who is tracking the finances, are you also tracking pay equity in your organization? If you're not, this is literally one of the first things that you can do, because it might be the thing that you're the most responsible for. Some folks said they conducted a pay equity audit. Some folks say repair harm done by pay inequities in the past, standardized pay scales across similar. Interesting. So we're having a couple of different ways that people are showing this up, including in listing salaries ranges on their job postings and transparently communicating about pay. Now, this is fantastic because a lot of folks are not doing this. Someone said we don't have a none of the above option. Interesting. Okay, so if you have none of the above, it's going to be even more important. I want to close out with, and I'll show you these results as we transition, because this is important that as we're kind of casting a vision of DEI, just in even asking you these questions, because we knew we had to ask these questions for polling for your credit purposes, but even starting to think about, hey, what can we do? There you have a couple of action items from the CFO perspective. We can share a bunch more action items, but it's important that just looking from here in this list in this poll that should still be on your screen, you're thinking about what can you do to conduct a pay equity audit? Or, some of y'all, it's going to be more intentional of how do we repair harm done by past pay inequity, especially when people have found out that people are making different amounts compared, especially if it's by gender. These things that are much more complicated to explain here, but you have to intentionally look at how do we repair that, and then being able to standardize pay scales across similar roles so we can take the bias out of these. And it generally starts, honestly, by listing salary ranges and job posting. And sometimes we tell people to do that, and they're like, we can't do that because what if one of our current employees finds out that this is a pay? It's like, boom, you're already seeing that there's pay inequity there. Because if there was pay equity there, then that would not matter. People would understand we're posting a job. They understand how pay and promotion works. So they start connecting the dots by, okay, I can see also what I need to do if I want to increase my pay. I understand what that means. So if your group cannot post salaries or salary ranges, that's an indicator that there has to be some conversations around pay equity, which then leads us into transparently communicating about pay scales and promotion pathways, and ensuring that all employee wages, that last one, move it over here, that we ensure all employees earn a wage that will enable them to thrive. And again, this is going to look different. We're not asking you to go bankrupt. We're saying, how do you align employee thriving with your financial goals so that way people can invest in your organization as well. Now, I'm going to share this last piece, and I want to make sure we can cover all the content in the final bit of time. And that way, those who want to stay, you're welcome to stay and continue chatting about it. But we left off talking about what actions we want to take. So we look at DEI as an ability to have diverse solutions with equitable outcomes and inclusive actions. And this is important for us. If we start, some people are asking, how do you even cast a budget for diversity, equity, inclusion? We want to consider the 10% rule here. This comes from the Workplace Research Foundation. And so we're talking about making DEI profitable, talking about a 10% increase in employee engagement investments can increase profits by $2,400 per employee per year. Now, some of you are like, oh, that's fine. It's like kind of nickel and dime. Let's put it back to the math equation that we had earlier. So we said for that employee who you're paying $60,000, and if they're disengaged, you're losing 34% of their salary, which is $20,000. So investing 10% in them can help to get them above that line, actually help engage them, helps to get that 100% that you're actually paying them for. And so it actually closes this deficit and gives you the $2,400 profit. So now we're actually looking at a $22,000 gain. So we're talking about making it profitable. We actually get the money back that you were paying and losing, as well as get profit from them out of their productivity. So for us, it's looking like if you're paying somebody $60,000, just think about investing 10% back into them, just as a high level to be thinking about your budget. Because it's important that when we talk about those 5 ROIs of DEI, when we give people a chance to invest their individuality in our organization, we can put out the people fire and we get those higher levels of engagement and their involvement. When we give people a chance to invest their intelligence into our processes, we get innovation. When we give folks a chance to invest their integrity into our policies, we get infrastructure because people actually follow the policies we put in place. And we give folks a chance to invest their leadership into our production, how we serve our clients, then we give them a chance to make that meaningful impact. And so do we as an organization. And we give folks a chance to invest in their livelihood, then we can put the bomb out altogether because people are more likely to invest in our organization. And we see this with even as little as 2 months of investment in having intentional DEI strategies. We can get 18% increase in customer retention, 19% in income and operating income, and then 28% increase in earning growth. Now, this is what we would call infinite wealth, where you have that combination of both employee and customer lifetime value, because the impact that you make on people's lives is beyond anything that we can measure, but we can also track it financially and through our culture. This is what we call the 5 ROIs of DEI. So I want to make sure we cover this before y'all close out, and this is pretty much ending right on time. So I'll say thank you very much, and I'll stay a little bit after for those of you who have questions that you want to chat about. And as we've been saying a couple of times, the best way to connect with us is go to fearsadvantage.com/KemyConnect. So thank you very much. And we end right on time. So,
Oh, Kemy, you are just right on time. Thank you so very much for that
absolutely.
very insightful presentation. It was fantastic, and I saw a lot of people are interacting, and we appreciate it. I know many of you are putting in the chat, Sharice will send to everyone, some of those links that you were talking about
Yep.
as you were going by. So, we will be on for another 15 minutes with Kemy. Um, if you have any further questions, and also I just want to say, hey, I apologize for the beginning when I was speaking, but I got to tell everybody, never eat an apple before a presentation because it gets stuck in your teeth. So anyway, we hope you can stay on. We're going to be here for another 15 minutes. So if anybody wants to turn on their camera and ask some questions, Emmy is here to help. And if you can't, we hope you have a great weekend and look forward to our next DEI Empower Hour, which will be coming up at the end of October. So stay tuned for that. Okay, great.
Tim, thanks for the shout out. Best ERP related to CFO role. We do the executive coaching. We coach CFOs too, because sometimes it's a numbers game, but the other piece to consider whenever you do have to let people go because of the numbers, are we actually thinking about the impact on our culture? And even if people stick around when somebody sees folks get fired, especially if that happens inequitably, people already start looking for other employment because they're trying to protect themselves, right? So I appreciate that, Tim, that we want to make sure y'all see that this is a numbers game, how do we track the finances and track our culture? How do we project our culture forward as well? Thanks, Tim. So this is a free open time. I want to make sure we can
Free
answer
open
some of those
time,
questions. Yeah.
people. Everybody had you can unmute yourselves. There are not many people on, so if people want to ask any questions. I saw some things coming
Yeah,
in the
the chat
chat
earlier.
area.
Let's see here. Room 13, each focused on one thing we can do. One was interesting using CoachRamp to establish a baseline. Two, we were interested in creating development and promotional pathways for team members, recognizing that the appropriate path for an individual may be outside of the organization. Yeah, I think this is why we love talking about what does thriving look like for an employee, because sometimes they realize, oh, like this one, you might find, let me just kind of backtrack. What's interesting is some of y'all know the term side hustle. Right? The side hustle was birthed out of people feeling like they can't thrive in the organization, so they start their own organization over here. And it's like, well, they're doing that on your clock, and sometimes helping them see like, oh, you can actually apply all those same skills and innovation that you were going to do to start your own business to our organization. Then it's like, okay, they actually see the alignment, and then it changes the game for their engagement as well as for their contributions to the organization. Sometimes in that thrive conversation, if they still can't see themselves going forward, at least they understand what it looks like for them to continue to invest until they make a transition. In the same organization that's planning to do some pretty major cuts, it was important that we also asked their leadership team, if you're going to make these cuts, when are you going to stop investing in people? They're planning to make cuts in December. It's like, okay, if you already know you're going to let someone go in December, are you going to still be taking care of them between now and then? If not, is it better to have a conversation about letting them go right now? Because we can't, if we start divesting in people before we let them go, then we also see how that creates more problems. And then the remainder of the team realizes like, oh, this is the writing's on the wall. It's coming. So it's important that we really are being strategic on, even when we have to let folks go, how we do that in a way that still keeps our culture growing and thriving.
Awesome. I was looking also down in the chat area too. As I'm scrolling up, Jack said one member was hired as a receptionist 28 years ago and was promoted several times and is now a CFO.
Let's
That's
go.
fantastic.
So they saw the pathway.
Yep, exactly. And then
It's-
when Kathy Hall said, we agree that our teams are working on empowering people to achieve and in providing resources toward personal and professional growth.
yeah, it's and I think when people can see that when we talk about the reason we talk about culture, a culture of equity and the thriving is, can everybody see themselves on the pathway to thriving? It will look different. It's not that we're not, we certainly support people having different needs and also different supports and different trainings and skills. So it's just more, can they see it aligned with something? So, if we have another conversation about like performance reviews and all that, we're saying, what is a performance review aligned with? If it's just aligned with the organization's success and people are like, it doesn't really matter to me. Like, yeah, I want to do well, but what does doing well do for me, right? And this is an interesting debacle that we've been having with a lot of folks who are trying to decouple performance reviews from promotions. I don't think they always have to have promotions. I do think we want to provide people with performance reviews and feedback that is moving them along to more and more thriving in the and from their perspective in the organization.
What would you recommend as the first step to start in order to make a DEI program that really works?
Yeah, we generally tell folks to assess instead of make a mess. We'll actually do an assessment that gives you a 360 of your organization. We generally mention that we have to go beyond employee engagement, just employee engagement surveys, to have one that can measure employee engagement with demographic information so you can actually see how it's impacting different groups. But one thing that's very important as you go about doing that is also to make sure that once you get that data, you act on it in a relevant time period, because feedback has a diminishing value. This is coming from Workify that says if you gather employee data, employee engagement data, or do a culture assessment, if you take longer at the 90-day mark, right, 3 months here, it already loses 40% of its value. So it's important that if we do an assessment, we have to act on it within 90 days, and especially communicate that we're acting on it. You don't necessarily, it's not asking you to rush, but it's asking you to make intentional effort. So if you want to kick off a DEI initiative powerfully, assess, get a full picture of what's actually going on in your organization, and then take action on that within 90 days and communicate the action that you're taking, because people are then more likely to trust that something will happen as a result of them giving their input, and they can see how you're taking progressive steps. So from that assessment, whatever you do, again, we mentioned earlier, we use Culture Amp. But you're welcome to reach out to us if you're already using that or using another platform. We might be able to help you fine tune the questions that you're asking, because the quality of your questions determines the quality of your results. So make sure you're asking questions that give you the information you're looking for, and use that in a way to help to develop short-term steps so people can see, and then long-term steps so people know that this is still going in a positive direction. And for those of you who are tracking along in the presentation, generally we look at people and process challenges or actions as more of the short term, whereas we start looking at policy and profit and sometimes production as some of the long term things, because those usually take a little bit longer to change. But you can be thinking about how do you focus your attention on where your data is telling you is the biggest fire, and help your team see that you do care about their data and do care about making things better.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. You definitely answered that well. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't want to.
Mohammed, you unmuted there. We still got Tim and Angela rolling with us.
No, I'm just listening. I just want to reflect and say, I mean, there's much that lies beneath the surface, and you got to, I mean, I'm in a unique position, or I think I'm in a unique position. I've worked in 3 separate continents for extended periods of time: Hong Kong, in the Middle East, and now in the United States. So I come across this bias or diversity, or what you call, in different places, in different cultures. So I'm reflecting upon what's currently happening here, and as it impacts, when it impacts profits, businesses look up.
Well, we've seen that show up in a couple ways too, where folks are not getting certain contracts because they don't have visual diversity on their team. Right. This is the first time people have been like rushing to us and saying, I know one of the questions earlier was, how do we recruit more diverse team members? So we're saying, well, if it hasn't been a priority until now, it's really about building trust in those diverse communities, because otherwise you're tokenizing people and choosing them for visual diversity. And then as you're hiring some of those folks, other team members who've been like, hey, I've been waiting for this kind of promotion for such a long time, and you just hired, a Black person for this role, and they know it's a diversity hire, or at least it feels that way, then we're also creating more conflict, and then it becomes even more of a profit problem. But to your other point, Muhammad, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I know that was a question earlier. This is part of the reason we measure demographic data inside of an organization. We do have an organization that works across multiple continents as well. And the interesting thing is seeing the experience inside of their super group by location. So now it's not a conversation about like worldwide diversity. It's like, hey, in our organization, we're saying that we're all one organization, but we're seeing, hey, here in Miami, there's one experience. You said you're working in other countries, so let's say our Europe division's having a different experience, and then our you gave an example. I forget all the places you said, but let's say here our folks in Ghana, our Africa division is not thriving. Let's focus our attention there and then kind of build it backwards, right? So something for you to be considering, Mohammed, as you represent multiple groups, is to be thinking, how can we gather the demographic data to show the experience across the board, to make sure that we as an organization, everyone that is in our team, regardless of their location, can have a pathway to thriving in our organization.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it gets fun and tricky, but trust me, as soon as we put data,
yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago, you remember the minority-owned businesses had inside track to federal contracts. So it's your businesses have a similar throwback now.
Yeah, and I think it's helping. Somebody asked me in a different presentation why that happened. It's like, well, we know minority businesses were not getting a fair shot before, and so it's important that it doesn't mean that your company cannot get one of those contracts. Like there's a prioritization, and we can look at there's different decisions that are being made, and I think the reason that we call it a culture of equity is people are watching, is this decision fair here? And then when my group's affected, is it also fair? If they see a difference, woo, that's where we start getting a problem. We've seen that over and over again, where across the world policies are applied different to different groups. So there's a mistrust that happens there. It's like I can't trust that this is fair for me because it wasn't fair for the other group, right? So this is how we are trying to take the conversation out of like a big thing of social justice and social reform to say, what are we doing inside our organization to make sure we're having integrity and fairness across our different decisions.
True. Okay.
Thanks
Thank
for that.
you.
Absolutely. And Tim, I seen you unmute for a moment, and we'll take your last one, and we'll roll.
Yeah, I was just going to say your point about it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. Every group thinks that they're in their own little globe and world anyway. So it doesn't matter what region of the world you're in. That particular organization thinks that that's their world. And so you're right. They focus on that one little globe in their wherever their desk is, wherever their office is, that's their world. I mean, that they go home, yes, but then when they're in their office every day, that's their world. And I think you hit it right on the head with you need to focus on that little world that they're in, not the global. And yes, you have to look at it from a global perspective, but when you're thinking about that, those 5 or 10 people or 20 people or whatever it is in that little office, that's their world, and that's what they go to every day. And I think that's exactly right. You have to make sure that they feel that trust within that world that they're in, and know that their leaders are looking out for them. Otherwise, you're not going to get that productivity, and that's where you see that time bomb just ticking every day in that little world that they're in.
Let's go, Tim. Perfect summary. I mean, especially because then our culture becomes a buffer to the world. It's like, hey, yes, it's a tragedy, but when you come to work, we got you. Like, we'll take care of you. That's the difference here. That's why we're telling people, we're talking about career equity. We're not asking you to save the world, but make sure that you're not re-traumatizing people inside of your organization. And I think there was one other question on that same note around what you were just mentioning there, Tim, is that when we start to look at benchmarking, like it's very wild for us because again, the platform culture amp will allow you to do benchmarking. People always ask us for benchmarking, and sometimes we're actually ahead of the industry average. And they're like, okay, great. And then we say, is that where you're going to stop? And then they're like, no. So it's like, yeah, benchmarking is fine for the beginning because people want that. And what's interesting though, if we're challenging our clients to go to that 90%, and most companies around the world are not like in this way. So we're asking them to go further, at least the ones who want to go towards thriving. But what's interesting though is once we start to do heat mapping and they get a chance to see comparisons, now they have benchmarks inside of the organization. Now it's a different conversation. It's much more tangible, especially if it's around gender or again around race or about department. Then it's like way more focused for them. Like, oh, how come marketing is not thriving compared to finance or sales? How do we figure out what's working for sales and make sure it works for marketing, make sure it works for admin and across the board? So this is how we start making it more approachable and people actually enjoy it because they get to see their numbers improve.
Kemy, you're just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all. This is Friday. I was hesitant to do a presentation on Friday, but you made the Friday well worth it. Thank you.
We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Everyone will, like I said, we will send off, Sharice will send off some of the links that Kemy was discussing within the presentation. And of course, if they have any questions, we'll also include his contact information. So I want to wish everyone, Kemy, and all of you who have stayed on, thank you so much and have a great weekend. Thank you again, Sharice.
Yeah,
Take
thank you,
care,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.